Now, the Department of Home Affairs has refuted media reports that its minister, Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi, has given orders or has given the green light for the South African Police Services to conduct spot checks to ascertain the status of foreign nationals. And this after media reports last week surfaced, and they suggested that Minister Motsoaledi had given instruction to law enforcement agencies to stop people and ask for their identification. Now, Dr. Motsoaledi joins us now to set the record straight on this particular matter and also speak to us on other matters pertaining to his portfolio. Dr. Motsoaledi, thanks so much for speaking to us. Welcome to Morning Live.
Morning, Sakina. Morning to the listeners and the viewers. Thank you very much for having me on Morning Live. Thanks.
So, Minister, first off, we are going to set the record straight, and which is one of the reasons why you're speaking to us this morning. So, your department released a statement over the weekend disputing what had been reported, saying that you had given the green light, as it were, for the South African Police Services to conduct spot checks or to ascertain the status of foreign nationals. So, please state for us exactly what it is that you're disputing and what is the correct version then of events.
Thank you, Sakina. Well, first of all, it would have been foolish for me to try and instruct police because I don't even have constitutional powers to give such an instruction to the police. The second thing is that what I'm being accused of having instructed police to do is what police have been doing for the past 20 years. There's nothing more to add. There is an Immigration Act which they follow every day. What has actually happened, Sakina, is that I was briefing the Portfolio Committee on Tuesday last week. One member of the Portfolio Committee complained that there was a person who was arrested and put in jail for the whole weekend because they could not identify that person. And they were waiting for Home Affairs official on Monday after the weekend to come and identify if the person is documented or not. Now, my answer was it does not have to be that way because there is a legal mechanism to identify people, which police are already using. Police have been using, and not only police and immigration officers, or let me say all law enforcement officers, Sakina, they do it at roadblocks. They do it in factories when they are doing inspections. They do it in restaurants. They do it in the farms. They do it all over South Africa, and they do it to everybody. It has got nothing to do with foreign nationals only because, Sakina, if you are at the roadblock and they stop you, ask for identification, how do they know? Nobody is written on their faces that this is a South African or a foreign national. But police do have a right in terms of Section 41, subsection 1 of the image, stop you and ask you for identification, as explained further in the media statement, that Regulation 37 actually describes the process which a law enforcement officer must follow. And there are 4 processes there. One of them, which is process number 3 or number C in the regulation, was boosted in 2010 World Cup, whereby a 24-hour unit was established. This 24-hour unit works 7 days a week. Any law enforcement officer who wants to ascertain your identity will phone that unit. They phone that unit and ask, because Sakina, you don't even have to carry your ID. If they ask you to identify yourself, you just say, look, I don't have my ID here, and you give them your ID number. Then they phone the center. The center will check in the National Population Register. If the ID number you gave is a South African number, the National Population Register will identify you. If, on the other hand, you are a refugee, they will check on the NIIS, National Immigration Information System, or NIIS. It will identify you. If you are an asylum seeker who is registered in one of the refugee reception centers, it will do the same on the NIIS. If you are in South Africa on a visa, whether it's a study visa or a worker's visa, retirement visa, a corporate visa and all that, they will check on VAS or VAS, and that system will identify what visa you are on. If, on the other hand, you don't produce any of those, they can check on the movement control system. When did you come to South Africa, whether you came by air or land or sea, and all those things can be done on the spot. And that is what the Act provides for. And that's why I was saying it doesn't make sense for me 20 years later to come and give instruction about the work that is being done. This method Sakina mentioning was actually used very recently when the Department of Home Affairs was called over to Krugersdorp after the very notorious story of the Zamazamas. That's how they identify them. That so many are foreign nationals, so many are illegals, so many are this and that.
So, Minister, where do you believe the confusion arose? Because, as you said, there are these various systems that are in place, and that the police can actually use the e-systems to verify persons' identity. So, where did the confusion come in?
It's not yet an e-system, just to correct Sakina. They still use the phone, they phone in. The e-system, which will be a handheld unit, is just being procured now, so that anywhere where there are law enforcement officers need not phone, but just to use that unit to get directly into the systems I'm telling you. So now to access those systems, every law enforcement officer has to phone, and the people who are manning that unit for 24 hours will get in one of the systems and give them the answer. Now, coming to the issue of confusion, I don't think there was confusion, Sakina. I think it was deliberate. The publication that did this is for the second time that they are putting screaming headlines about me, which are false. You may remember that when there was a problem in Diepsloot, I went there with the Minister of Police, Bheki Cele. While we're in the hall with the community, there is a gentleman from Zimbabwe who stood up and introduced himself as coming from the Communist Party of Zimbabwe. People jumped for him, they wanted to kill him. And I left Minister Cele in the hall. I rushed out to save that person, hand him over to security, to take him out of the place, because the anger was very high. And remember, people had died in Diepsloot, were not prepared for another death. So I jumped in to intervene. 30 minutes later, the publication which you say caused this confusion. 30 minutes later, it was a screaming headline: Minister chases a Zimbabwean out of a community meeting in Diepsloot. And when I protested, after another 30 minutes, they changed that headline. So the same publication did these screaming headlines after attending a parliamentary meeting, after I've made this explanation. So I don't think there was confusion. It was very deliberate. That's how they do their things.
So, again, Minister, this system that you speak about and the particular situation that was raised in the Parliamentary Portfolio Committee about someone having been detained over a weekend, is that particular facility manned 24 hours a day? You say it should be, but do you have any certainty that in fact it is? Because I'm asking this just to try and establish where the problem arose. Is it that the SAPS didn't know about this, that they didn't call it for whatever reason, or could it have been that the center wasn't staffed as it was supposed to be?
The center works for 24 hours, Sakina. Actually, it does two things which are very important. Part of the reason why we are being accused of chasing only Africans and never chasing people from Europe is because it's almost impossible for people from Europe to come into South Africa illegally because of that system. Because that system does two things. Number one, any plane, Sakina, that leaves any part of the world at any one time within a period of 24 hours, before that plane departs, they must give they must email the list of passengers. It is called passenger manifest to that unit here in South Africa. The unit will check in the system, check throughout all our system to see if there's any undesirable person in the plane who is not supposed to be coming to South Africa. And they will instruct the plane that that person shouldn't come in. If the person comes in by force, because sometimes airliners do so, because they are scared of losing money. When they arrive here, in terms of the act again, we charge them 15,000 rand per passenger, which they bring illegal. And that passenger must be taken back in the next flight of that same airliner at their own cost. And that's exactly one of the things that the system does. So there's no chance that it don't be open for 24 hours because flights leave parts of the world throughout the whole 24 hours. The second thing it does is exactly what I said. Any law enforcement officer, be it a Metro Police, a South African police, or what you call labor inspector, can phone and say, what is the identity of this person? And they do it to everybody, even to you, Sakina. If you arrive at the roadblock, how will they know on your face that this one is not a South African? They will ask you, and then we'll check in the National Population Register exactly what your ID is. And the act goes further to say, if the person doesn't have that ID, identification, be it a South African ID, be it an asylum seeker Section 24 permit, be it a refugee Section 24 permit, be it a refugee Section 5 permit which they obtain at the border, be it a visa, one of the 17 visas. If you don't have this, that police officer must help you to go and get it where it is. If it's at home, they must even help you to phone relatives or even, if possible, take you there. Only after identifying that you don't have any of those and nobody's prepared to identify you is then that they arrest you. That's how the system works. And that's how people are taken to Lindela every day. That's how Home Affairs is able to determine that this one is illegal, is because they are not found in any of the systems that we have.
I think we have some clarity on that score now, Minister. Just moving on to a few other issues pertaining to your department. What is the current status in terms of the backlog in permit appeals for asylum seekers and refugees, Minister?
Sakina, let me explain the concept of a backlog. And it's very important for you to understand the system and why the United Nations came in to try and help us. When there was an avalanche of, a large number of people running to South Africa in 2009, particularly due to the economic collapse of Zimbabwe in 2008, when there were such a large number of people, many of them came here as asylum seekers, when actually many of them were economic migrants who were looking for greener pastures, for jobs and all that. Now, when they arrive at the Refugee Reception Center, they are processed in terms of the United Nations Convention of 1951 or the Protocol of United Nations of 1967 or the OAU, Organization of African Unity, Convention of 1969. Then the Refugee Act of South Africa of 1998, they process you in terms of that. Now, if you don't qualify in terms of that act, they reject you. Now, the mechanism in South Africa is that there's an ending appeal system, which one judge called a bureaucratic ladder created by the state, unfortunately. Then they go on an appeal. It is that on that appeal process where there's a backlog, because everybody appeals, and the appeals are really unending. And that's why we develop a backlog. Then also, the Act was making the appeal process very tedious. It was making it impossible for the people there to finish it, because the Act was saying there ought to be 5 people who hear these appeals, and every time they hear an appeal, they must make a quorum, and a quorum is 3 people. And the 5 people who, they form what is called RASA, Refugee Appeals Authority, which at that time was called Refugee Appeals Board. The 5 people, one of them must be legally trained, must be a lawyer. And they say when they form a quorum, the lawyer must always be there, which means out of the 5 people, even if they've got 1,000 cases, they must hear the cases one by one being 3. The other people will not be working. And so it's like in the court of law, if they say every single case that appears in court, there must be a full bench. You are aware that a full bench is 3 judges hearing one case at the same time. Imagine if the legal system was working like that. But unfortunately, that's how the immigration system was working. And eventually, they have to change it. And changing it means you can now hire lawyers. Each one of them can hear the case individually. That's when the United Nations came in a program with us They gave us 143 million rand over the next 4 years. And with it, we are allowed to hire 36 lawyers. At the moment, there are still 26. Next week, we are interviewing another 10 to make them 36. They are going to hear these review cases, these appeal cases. So most of the backlog is on appeal. That means people have been processed, but they are not satisfied. They appeal. And remember, Sakina, in the legal system in South Africa, after exhausting all those appeal processes in the immigration process, because the appeal bodies which hear them are statutory, after exhausting them, you can still go to start afresh in a court of law as a civil case. That's why, Sakina, the people who were held up in the Methodist Church in Cape Town, you remember Judge Tulare ruled against them in that process. After having been here for 13 years, going through this appeal process, and eventually they appeared in front of a magistrate who confirmed that they ought to be deported. They don't deserve any asylum or any international protection, not only in South Africa, but in any country. We had to deport them back to the DRC. One of them, Papi Sakumi, actually formed a political party 2 weeks on arrival in the DRC and even tweeted. And none of them were persecuted as they were claiming. But they spent 13 years in South Africa going through this tedious process of appeals. And that's why then we talk of a backlog.
And just finally, Minister, it speaks to something that you've been grappling with, which is corruption within the system. And when you were in Parliament addressing the Portfolio Committee, the issue of Prophet Shepherd Bushiri came up, and you indicated that the Hawks had not divulged the information with regard to exactly how Bushiri managed to flee the country. If I'm getting those details wrong, please correct me, but has there been any further details, any update from the Hawks in this regard?
No, you're not getting it wrong, Sakina. The Hawks made it very clear, and I was just emphasizing because they told us long ago. Remember, after Shepherd Bushiri escaped, our job in Home Affairs was to find the type of documentation he was on, and we found that he was actually having a permanent residence permit. He was a permanent resident of South Africa with a South African ID, but the special one for permanent residents. And we discovered that it was found fraudulently. We started the process of charging the people who have done so. One of them is already, the most senior of them has been dismissed. The others are still going through a DC. We also reported the matter to the Hawks. That's one part of the story. The second part was to find out how he left the country. We checked on the movement control system. It came up with nothing, which meant he never left legally, neither through the airport or through the seaport or from the land port. He left, but not legally, because he's not recorded anywhere. And the Hawks started the job of investigating how. They then said they are not going to report it to anybody, not even to me, Sakina. I must confess to you, I tried many times. They said, no, we're not telling anybody because it is part of what we are going to submit to the judge. When the extradition process is over with Bushiri and he comes to South Africa and they charge him for that 102 million rand fraud case, and we come in on our permanent residence, the Hawks will also present a criminal case on how he escaped. And that's why they said they will never disclose it to anybody, not to us, not to Parliament, not to anybody. All of us will hear it for the first time when they present it in front of a judge.
Well, Minister, we're going to leave it there. But thank you so much for speaking to us this morning, setting the record straight on a few matters and also giving us updates. Minister of Home Affairs, Dr. Aaron Motsoaledi there.